Greetings, friends. I'm Pastor Deb. Today in the studio, I have a special guest with us. We have Jalicia Maeweather. Jalicia and I have met over the years at different things, but it was an interesting thing for me. This past spring, I experienced the death of my brother, so a very close death in my family. And a friend had handed me this book that Jalicia wrote. Yeah, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about why you wrote the book and some of your hopes for how the book will help people.
I wrote the book about 2 years ago now, that was actually 3 years after my father passed away. He passed away very suddenly. We weren't expecting it. And I had so many ugly emotions that I never felt before. I never experienced them. And I felt really weird because all of these emotions were just all new things, uncomfortable things.
In the Christian community, sometimes we misunderstand grief.
Absolutely.
In lots of ways, I think sometimes we think it's better to keep a brave face and kind of stuff our emotions down a little bit, and people think someone's doing well if they're not crying or aren't emotional. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that, about carrying some of those emotions.
I definitely was not ready. I was raised in a Christian home. I grew up in the church, and I have never experienced grief within like a close family member like that before. But I've seen other people go through it, and they looked fine. They were great.
Yeah.
I always saw them smiling. They just prayed about it. Everything was good. And then I got into that situation myself, and those results are not typical.
For me, it's just valuable to remember that Jesus cried.
Yes.
When you think that, our Jesus, our Lord, was moved to tears, and that was okay. That wasn't a sin. That was an expression of humanity, the pain that we feel in this life when we lose something that's dear to us. I know for myself personally, to sit in church was painful for me. Like I felt like everybody around me was joyful and happy, and nobody understood the heartache that I was feeling in that place. And I just longed for the church to speak my lament.
Yes.
That
Yes.
I wanted to have my grief acknowledged.
Right.
Like that was a place that I couldn't. I'm too emotional of a person to be fake. Like
Right.
I just wanted I wanted somebody else to carry that with me. And I'd love for you to speak to, how people have helped you carry your grief well, and maybe how people have not responded well to helping you through the grieving process.
I absolutely understand with being at church and everyone around you is praising and worshiping, and my church family was great with being around me and supporting my family and I. But it wasn't their grief, it was mine.
Yeah.
So as their lives got back to normal, mine was still a mess.
Yeah.
One of the hardest things is letting go of your power, or you think you have power, your control.
Our control, yes.
Right.
We all think that we have some control in life, and then we're very humbled in these circumstances.
Yes. You have no control. You have to rely heavily on God. He is the only person who has all the power, all the control.
And that can be hard too, as some of our grieving is maybe being unhappy with God, unhappy with the circumstances that God allowed to happen in our lives.
Right.
Can make us feel distant from God.
Right.
Yeah. And I think as you talk about, that, God is your constant and hanging with him, it's such a reminder to me of how the psalmist speaks.
Yes.
That in the Psalms, the psalmist can be angry with God and frustrated with God and disappointed with God and ask the same questions we ask. Where were you, God?
Mm-hmm.
Where were you? Do you even hear me? And the psalmist can ask all these questions, and yet the Psalms always come around to a but yet moment, or and still, and still I will praise you, but yet I will call on your name, but yet I will worship in your house and glorify your name. And the Psalms to me have just been a huge comfort because they give me permission, to share all the emotions that culturally, I come from a culture that, sharing your emotions is very taboo, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just not something that we necessarily do.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's super important to focus on that. It's okay to be a Christian and to have other emotions as well. Like being a Christian doesn't mean that you are full of happy, joy all the time.
Yeah.
Life is hard. We will experience life. We'll experience grief. We're not exempt from it.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to not be okay, especially for Christians. God is our strength. God will work through us. In our weakness is when he is our strength. We can lay all of our ugly feelings, all of our burdens, all of our trials, all the things that we don't understand, we can leave that all with him. We don't have to figure out everything on our own.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing to remember. We are not in this alone at all.
I think a piece for me was recognizing that our God is so big that he can handle all these feelings of ours, right? That, we could lash out in anger and say whatever. God can take it.
He can take it.
Yeah.
He can take it.
And he wants to hear the things that weigh on our hearts. He longs for us to, pour out our hearts, to share our tears. And I appreciate the expression of tears in Scripture, that God holds all our tears in a bottle, or he, how he cares about every tear that falls, and knowing that Jesus cried, and especially the picture of Revelations, that a day is coming when he wipes every tear from our eyes, and that sorrow will be no more. So even in these days where we grieve, Thessalonians tells us we don't grieve as those who have no hope.
Yes.
That we have a hope that God's going to make things right. And in this season, we grieve, it's a sign of how much we loved, that we weep and we carry all these feelings, but we do so with the hope of the resurrection, that Jesus overcame death, and that gives us a hope that we can hold to even as we struggle. I would love to hear you speak to how grief looks different for different people.
Yeah, it's a lot. It does not look the same for everybody. We were offered to go to the Gilda's Club for support group, and they were so amazing. Some people had been there for years. They would sit in the support groups and they would be sobbing after 5 years later, like it had just happened.
Yeah.
Some people were there and it seemed like they were untouched by it.
Yeah.
They were just there. I think an important thing to remember is you can't be strong for other people. A lot of people will try to say, oh, well, you have to be strong for this person. You have to, put on a strong face for mom or dad or sister or brother.
Yeah.
You don't. Everyone's journey is their own. It's the same God walking with us, but we all are walking different paths. And mom has to grieve for herself. sister has to grieve for herself. You have to grieve for yourself. You can't take on the emotions of other people. Everyone has to go through their own journey on their own.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's good to take some of that pressure, all of that pressure off of yourself. You don't have to put on a strong face for anyone. The same God that is with you is with your mom, is with your family member. Whoever else is hurting, that same God is with them, and He is with you. So I think that's a really important thing to remember.
There are some people that may not shed a tear, but boy, are they feeling it on the inside, and you know, and maybe part of that's our cultural conditioning of you know,
sure.
not being so open with how we grieve, but I think there's some importance to letting people feel whatever they're feeling.
Absolutely.
and just being a bit of a safe place, you know, if they want to talk, if they just want to you know, go about life, that we're coming alongside.
Right. And I think it's hard and brand new for everyone, because it's brand new emotions for everyone. It's new emotions for the person that's grieving, and new emotions for the person that's trying to support the grieving person. No one really knows what to do.
Yeah.
We are just there.
Yeah.
Like, I was so scared that I would sound weird or crazy, like I was losing my mind, because I had all these emotions.
Yeah.
But I knew I couldn't hold them in. I knew holding them in would not be beneficial.
Yeah.
So I just let them out, and thankfully I had safe people around me that were there and just let me go crazy and scream and cry and let me have all these emotions. And it was very, very helpful in that.
Yeah. I think some people just don't know how to act around someone who's grieving. Like they don't dare say the name, or they don't dare, you know, they're,
I don't want to trigger anything.
Yeah. And yet, you know, our hearts want to talk, right? You know, like we don't want to ignore that person's presence in our lives, and you know, we're looking for people who are safe.
Yes.
You know, where we feel like we can say the name of the person we've lost. We can tell, you know, a story that makes us, you know, laugh or cry or angry or whatever, and just say those things that are weighing on us, and not feel judged for, oh, you should have moved on by now, or you know why are you talking about all these things, like you need to move past this, or there's lots of ways that people can, you know, be supportive or not supportive, you know, through the grieving process. And I hope that that people will see how, like Job's friends, when they sat around him and listened, when they just chose to listen and be present.
That was great.
What a gift they were to Job, you know, as Job's processing and working through all these things, just having those friends there. You know, but once the friends chose to lecture, like...
Yeah, that was the first mistake. No.
Yeah, so lecturing's not helpful.
No.
But there's lots of ways that people can care in very simple ways.
Yes.
You know, I think of, you know, as we were grieving the loss of my brother, how much it meant when people could share a picture or share a story, or... You know, people just showed up with food. Like, food is such a comfort. You know, there's just a piece of sharing food in common that's medicinal to our souls.
Yes.
You know,
We didn't cook for months. People brought so much food. The freezers were full. We were so grateful.
Yeah, we kind of refer to that as Dutch coping. Culturally, you know, you show up with a hot dish or you show up with cookies, and that was your coping, right? You know, you baked something, and that was, you know, that was how you handled your grief, was cooking for a friend. But those shared times of, you know, bringing food, you know, sitting with sharing photos, those things were helpful steps in the process of being able to lay the grief down, to be able to find ways to process it and let God carry it. I think we try to carry so much on our own.
Yes.
And we, in those seasons realize how fragile we are, that, we think that we're strong people, that we're so capable. And then, grief is very leveling, that all of a sudden we realize, we didn't have any control in any of this.
Not at all.
Yeah. I know in your book you visit some of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's looking at denial and anger and bargaining and depression and then finally acceptance. Though those things aren't very linear, we kind of visit them at all different points in the grieving process. And I really appreciated in the book how you talked about how those things look for Christians, like what denial looks like in grief for Christians. I would love for you to speak to some of how you saw those emotions play out for you as a Christian walking through the grieving process.
Yeah. It was definitely a battle. It was hard. I was so angry. I was so angry with God, and it was hard to talk with him for a while because it was nothing but anger.
Yeah.
And it was really hard for me to get past that. Once I was able to get into understanding grief, then that was able to make things a little bit better. I didn't know anything about grief. I didn't know that there were 5 stages of grief. I thought that when someone's family member died, that they were sad and they cried for a while, and then, all right, now we go back to...
And then they moved on. And
that's what I was expecting to do, and I was waiting for that to happen, and it never happened that way. So it was definitely a shock for me.
Yeah. And grief looks very different from the inside of it than when you're looking at it in someone else's life.
Yes. Yeah, it was completely... I felt the sadness, but I also felt confused and hopeless, lost. I just didn't know anything. And it made it very... Like, at first, it was hard for me to trust God, to be completely honest. It was hard because he took away my dad.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't done with him yet.
Yeah.
I still had things to do. He was able to see, like, my nieces and nephews, my sister's kids, and I haven't had kids yet. He hasn't been able to see them. It was upsetting.
Yeah. Yeah, and a real piece of loss, that won't ever get to happen.
No.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to do that now, but...
It's okay.
There was so much anger to work through.
Yeah.
And, like, you go through the stages of grief, the denial, anger, bargaining. They don't come in order.
No.
They don't come in any sort of order. They don't come on a schedule. They don't call and let you know I'm on my way.
No. They come at the most inopportune times.
In the grocery store. Yeah. Like looking at fruit. It will hit you, it will pop up, and it's just random and weird. And it's one of those things, sadly, until you experience it, you really don't understand.
Yeah.
Because saying this to someone who hasn't lost anybody, you just sound crazy.
Yeah, yeah. But how fast a memory comes flooding back.
Oh my gosh.
You smell something, you see something, and all of a sudden all the emotions are up front, right? That you struggle with, how do you express this? Because all of a sudden you're in church and your eyes are full of tears and you're overwhelmed, and it's a process to be able to name those emotions, to be able to acknowledge what's going on in your body when all these things happen. And for me, just to be able to say, God gave us these emotions, and he knows them, he understands them, he sees them as a gift to us, we have these emotions. and to find ways to express them that honor God, that honor the person that He put in our life that we love so much, right? That it's okay. We can be okay with that flood of emotions.
And I think that's a really hard thing for Christians to accept too, is that we do have all these ugly emotions. And I think some of us feel untouched because we are Christians. Like, how dare I have these feelings? I'm a Christian. I don't do that. Like, we put on this air as if we're untouchable, and the Word never said that. The Word never said that. And I think it's hard to experience these emotions as a Christian because we don't want to feel these ugly feelings. Like, who does? Who wants to feel these ugly feelings? But it's just a feeling. It's temporary. It will pass. It's okay to feel ugly. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel bad. It's only temporary. It will pass. You have to feel your feelings so you can move on. Because once you start to bury them, and then you bury more on top, it's never going to end well. It's never going to end well.
Yeah, when we bury those feelings, our body is still experiencing them.
Yes.
And you know, it can rot our health as well as our emotions and our spirits.
Yes.
You know, that when we carry all this suppressed emotion, it'll wind up coming out, erupting, you know, at super unhealthy times and in ways that we never plan. But it can also cause all kinds of issues within our bodies, you know, and it's surprising how much, you know, our bodies pay the price when we don't handle our emotions well. Yeah,
it definitely takes a toll. Like, if you break down the word disease, it's dis-ease. Like, you hold in all these emotions, all these things, they weigh on your body. Like, a lot of the stress that we have and that we hold in causes hypertension. Like, it shows up, and we may be okay burying it for right now, but it will present itself again in maybe an ailment or an illness of some sort, like
ulcers and all kinds of things that that your body's not meant to carry all of that discomfort, right? You know, and to be able to find ways that you can share. I know one thing that was helpful for me after the death of my grandma was that my counselor had said, you need to journal. You need to write letters to your grandma and just tell her all the things that you want to say. You know, let her know what's going on in your life. And I was like, yeah, right. You know, like, I'm gonna. And you know, you humor them, right? You know, they're a trained professional. You're trying to do what they tell you to do, you know, as you're feeling stuck in your grief. And I tell you, journaling wound up being, you know, a really healthy process for me to be able to just pour all my feelings out. And I know that in the writing I do for Family Fire, so much of it comes out of, you know, anger or frustration or whatever is going on in my life. It becomes a channel that I'm able to express the things that maybe words don't come easy, but somehow, you know, putting your hand to the pen or putting your fingers on the keyboard, you know,
it
somehow
just flows through you.
Yeah. And I wonder, you know, in writing the book, was that a piece of catharsis for you to be able to put those things out into the world? And
absolutely. I was so scared that I would sound weird or just illiterate and random, because that's exactly what I was feeling. I was feeling all those things, and I said, I don't care. It'll help somebody. Someone else is feeling this. Someone else is going through this. And I think that was a big piece that helped me just to keep going. It's not a very long book. It's very short. I don't think that grieving people are really interested in reading long books. There's so much more going on. And well,
I know your book was a gift to me as I was grieving. You know, just a reminder of all the ways that we as Christians can grieve a loss, and we can do it in ways that honor God, that honor the person that we loved, and that will be medicinal to our own souls, to be able to cry out with the psalmist, and to allow those places of lament and all the ways that we try to bargain with God about things, and there's so much good processing for how Christians can walk through the process. And I'm grateful for your book, and I'm really appreciative that you were willing to come here and have a conversation, because I think there's lots of people in our audience. We have people write us on a regular basis of all the different pains that people carry, and this is a great way to be able to learn that it's okay for Christians to struggle with this, and for me, connecting with a counselor was a gift. That here's people that have had all this professional training, and it's just a gift that they can step into our pain, and they see it from outside of our experience, and can guide us into how do we take these next steps, and how do we keep engaging in the world and finding our safe people, and figuring out how to keep praying and how to keep connected to God through these very real emotions that we all feel in grief.
Yes, I always encourage therapy. It's so hard to try to process all these feelings on your own. As Christians, we know we need to pray about it. But also, God has given us so many amazing doctors and therapists, counselors. Like, God gives us all of these resources. So this is the way that God is blessing us. He's helping us by providing all of these resources that we can use. And it's not a sign of weakness. It's a strength to be courageous enough to let someone else into our mess and stand in our puddle with us. And a lot of the people around us may not understand the grieving process, or may not understand how to support us well. And so the gift of a counselor is a beautiful thing as we walk through the grieving process. So thank you so much for coming and for sharing your book and putting your process of grieving out into the world. And if anybody's interested in this little book, to be able to look at how Christians can deal with these uninvited guests of grief. It's a lovely little book, and I'm so grateful that you wrote it, and I'm grateful that you came and talked to us today. Thank you so much.
So thanks so much. All right, take care, my friends. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.